Hi, my name is John Kirkegaard. I'm a farming systems agronomist based at CSIRO in Canberra. And today we're going to be talking about nitrogen management in dual-purpose crops. So dual-purpose crops, as you probably know, are crops that are sown early and grazed during the winter, then locked up and grown on to produce grain. There's dual-purpose wheats, barley, triticale, canola. All these crops can be grazed early if the right variety is sown in the right place. And of course, questions arise about how are we going to manage the nitrogen nutrition on those crops. For the very early sown crops, winter wheats like revenue or wedgetail, because these crops have vernalisation requirement, they can be sown in February or March, and they'll remain completely vegetative, producing leaf for forage right through until July, early August, when they're locked up. So that enormous potential to produce biomass begs the question about how to manage nitrogen in those crops. Another important issue in managing nitrogen is that too high a nitrogen level in the vegetative biomass can cause problems like nitrate poisoning in animals. So we have to try and find a balance between fertilising the crop to a point where it can produce to its potential, but not putting animals in harm's way with too high nitrogen levels on the material they're grazing. So in recent years we've been looking at the factors that drive that early biomass production in dual-purpose crops. So some of the things you can think about to improve the amount of forage for grazing is sowing earlier to capture more growth, using a variety that's vigorous, improving the density, the plant density, but turns out nitrogen is a key factor. We've found in very early sown crops in March, we need to have about 150 kilograms of nitrogen in the soil to support the growth of those crops to optimise the biomass. Those crops can be growing and grazed right from March through to February. They can have 3 months of grazing in that time, so they're producing an awful lot of leaf for grazing, and we need quite a significant amount of nitrogen to support that. We would recommend that you make that nitrogen available, if it's not already in the soil when you soil test, to top dress quite early, so that the crop can grow and dilute that nitrogen before the animals go on. Because as I said, very high nitrogen concentrations in a crop too close to grazing will put the animals at risk of nitrate poisoning. So by no means should you fertilise a crop within 2 weeks of when you intend to graze it, because that nitrogen fertiliser will go into the crop and it'll be at very high concentrations when the animals are eating. So we've shown that you need that nitrogen there to really give you the advantage of the early sowing to drive high grazing potential, whether it be wheat, canola, barley, and around about 100 to 150 kilos of N seems to support the optimum level of growth in those winter sown crops. Later sown crops into April, where you can still get some grazing, they'll have a lower grazing potential and therefore a lower nitrogen requirement, so somewhere around 100 kilograms is probably advisable. Now after you've finished grazing, the question is then, do I need to apply more nitrogen to allow that crop to recover? Quite a bit of the nitrogen that's grazed by animals will be turned over and returned to those fields as both manure and urine. Now whilst that's still available in the soil, it does get tied up and may not become available immediately to that crop. So we recommend top dressing as you normally would an ungrazed crop in that winter period post-grazing to assist the crop to recover. So by close attention to this nitrogen management, you'll get the most out of these crops, which have a very high potential to produce biomass and then to recover to produce a high yield. And the return from that nitrogen covers that cost. But obviously, number one, soil test, know where you stand. If your soil test is low, add some nitrogen up to that 100 to 150 kilos of N prior to grazing. Top dress post grazing according to where the season's heading and what you think the yield potential is. If it's turning dry, you may hold off a little. If it looks like you're going to support a high yield, well, by all means, add the nitrogen. For wheat, we recommend the crop needs to see about 40 kilos of N for every tonne of yield you intend to remove, and for canola about 80 kilos of N for every tonne of yield you intend to remove. So if you're talking about a 4-tonne wheat crop, that's 160 kilos of N. 4-tonne canola crop, that'll be 320 kilos of N. So when you do your budget, take that into account, and depending on seasonal conditions, add the nitrogen accordingly.